All right, so welcome back. This is the Black Politics Show. Officially the Black Politics Show. We got the name, and moving forward, um, I'm Hutch. On the other side of the mic is my man Bryson. It was good to the people, dog.
Yo.
Type beat. And so, yeah, we're gonna get into it today. Got a few topics. I believe Bryce is talking about Candace Owens and Boeing and everything that's going on there. And I plan on giving a little overview of the presidential candidates. And if we have enough time, get into a little bit of the online censorship issue um, going around with TikTok and other social media platforms. But so, Bryce, you're up first, man. Let's rock.
All right, let's get into it. So, starting off today's topic with Candace Owens being fired from the Daily Wire, a conservative news source. And so, if you don't know who Candace Owens is, she is or has been a prolific conservative, Black conservative woman that has been kind of essentially paraded around as the token minority in a lot of conservative spaces because she says things that sound good to conservatives. Ultimately, she has a lot of anti-black, anti-woman sentiments, and so it's interesting that she got fired last week, actually, over what was presumed to be an anti-Semitic comment. And so what's interesting here currently is that there's a lot of debate going on because it seems like Candace Owens has been switching her tune to be more progressive, more liberal. The comments that actually got her fired that were deemed anti-Semitic was that she was looking to, or essentially stating that the actions that Israel has taken towards Palestine have been in alignment with genocide, which is true. But this kind of well, it's an interesting line because, of course, she's had a lot of problematic views in the past and still continues to hold quite a few of them. Notably, last year or the year before that, actually, when Kanye and her both came to a showing with White Lives Matter T-shirts on at these showings. So, of course, she has an agenda that she's pushing, and it seems like, to me at least, now that she's out from the conservative media that she made so much money on, she's trying to pivot her ideas and pivot her platform to be more black friendly, more progressive friendly, which definitely seems disingenuous. But it also seems like a money ploy to get money from the same communities that she has repeatedly downed and dissed in her commentaries on her show. So I want to get your thoughts on that and see where your head's at with that.
Yeah, so you said why did she get fired? It was more like anti-war sentiment?
So she actually made a comment that kind of resonated with the war or the genocide that's occurring in Palestine and how she thinks that Israel's actions weren't necessarily justified. And so she also implied that a small ring of Jewish people like kind of oversee a lot of the things that go on within the United States. And so she was fired for those two comments for being anti-Semitic. If I'm correct, Ben Shapiro is Jewish or has Jewish
Yeah,
heritage. And so
yeah.
he, of course, is the owner of the Daily Wire. And so she was let go last week for those comments.
Yeah, I mean, when you make those anti-Semitic, I mean, it's not even anti-Semitic, but when you throw that type of theory in there, especially when you know who your boss is, and I'm not gonna lie, they do run a lot of things. I'm trying to figure out who owns, or do you know what the Daily Wire comes on? Is it like a program or is it like a YouTube show?
I'm quite sure that it's a podcast. Never
Okay,
really did too much research into that. But I do know Ben Shapiro is big in the podcasting world. So
facts. Yeah, like you said, I think it's definitely a pivot for her for money. I think she saw how Tucker Carlson pivoted like right after he got fired from Fox, and he's been doing very successful actually lately. And he's kind of mimicking more of like a Joe Rogan, very anti-war right now. And I think that's kind of what she was going for. But then when you throw in the little Jewish comment, that's going to put everybody in a frenzy. Ask Kanye, ask Kyrie. I actually wrote a paper on that too. Um, it's interesting, kind of the ways that they will off you and unperson you for saying certain things. Like even us, we have to be careful with certain things we say on YouTube, just because I'm pretty sure they're under. And it might not be OSHA, but it's one of those global companies, and they kind of monitor everything that you say, and then they will take down and demonetize your page, even though we're not making money right now. But and not to segue that deep because it does get deep. My bad, guys. But I think it's definitely a saving face thing for her right now. And if she keeps pushing that narrative, I mean, it's easily shift. It could easily shift for her. I mean, she's a black person. She has a voice. She's strong, and she's gonna stand on her viewpoints. So I mean, if it's entertainment wise or more for entertainment and more of those conspiracy theory things, I think she's just leaning into what's popular right now, like you were saying.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and that's what worries me about the whole thing because her viewpoints have definitely been problematic, and now she's pivoting to basically another money grab. So, of course, the kind of conservative commentary, the conservative kind of voices have been peaking, starting kind of before the Trump presidency when he was running. Of course, you had your Tucker Carlsons, your I forgot the lady that was on CNN. Or not seeing it on Fox News, and she would always kind of voice her like kind of crazy out there conspiracy theories. And so a lot of these people are kind of changing their tune now that they're seeing that the kind of grift train is pretty much run its course because of course like you had people that were staunch Trump supporters in his cabinet, and a lot of his cabinet and biggest supporters are going to jail or facing fines. Giuliani, Steve Bannon. So I think that people are sort of beginning to jump ship and trying to find a new demographic to really swindle, which really worries me, especially because with her being with her being a black woman, that can that can move weight within the black community because as far as I know, there aren't a ton of black commentators out there on either side of the aisle. So, of course, Don Lemon was ousted from CNN, and now Candace Owens, and so that was two of the biggest political commentators that we have as black people. Of course, Don Lemon being at CNN, being a Democrat, and Candace Owens being at the Daily Wire, being more conservative. And so, of course, it's a bit worrying to see her next steps, especially now that she's like pivoting specifically to focus on the black demographic. And so, I think that that'll be interesting going into the 2024 election here. But I know you have more on that, so I'll let you get into that.
Yeah. So our next topic will just be kind of like an overview of the presidential candidates, just so everyone who's listening kind of gets an kind of up to date is up to date right now because President Biden and former President Trump don't have like their official 2024 campaign platforms up yet online. So I took some information that President Biden had talked about in his State of the Union address off of whitehouse.gov. And then I got some information from about Trump's platform, but it's from NBC. So just a like heads up to everybody, take the Trump portion of this with a grain of salt, just because no legacy media is going to write really what he wants or what he might actually think, and they definitely try to vilify him a little bit. Again, not for Trump, but legacy media does really beat that man's ass. No cap. But so starting with Joe Biden, he's the incumbent, which means he's basically the Democrats' only option on the ticket since he previously won the presidential election. Um, he said the aim of his agenda was to solve big challenges that would unite all Americans. And so some of those goals are to beat the opioid epidemic, tackling mental health crisis. Um, he says he wants to hold big tech accountable, which again is that social media, really online censorship. That's really the big problem with that. anybody who kind of says holding big tech accountable kind of really means online censorship. And then he said he wants to meet some obligations that he had made to veterans. And then another big one he said was ending cancer. And so I chose like three major ones and just wanted to give an overview on that. If you want to read more into it, it's on whitehouse.gov and you could just go look at it. So the opioid epidemic, he says he wants to stop the flow of fentanyl from entering communities. And then he has said last year alone they had seized enough fentanyl to kill every American, which is crazy to think of. And the way he looks to do this is by cracking down on drugs crossing the border by using high-tech drug detection machines, which I don't even know how that will work because they got them tucked away in something. So I mean, I'd have to read through it. And then he said they also wanted to crack down on criminal networks supplying this drug. So that means Chinese companies that manufacture and distribute it. And then it also mentions El Chapo's drug cartel, kind of aiming it more at his son, which I'm just like, that's crazy. And then the next one, big tech. He says he wants to control more social media because of the harmful effects it could have on the mental well-being of young American children. Uh, they say he says he plans on limiting how companies collect, use, share people's personal data, and then he also says controlling personal communications and limiting them on knowing where you are as well as biometric data, which I agree. They don't need as much of your personal communications or your location, really biometrics. I mean, that's crazy for any company to really have that. But he's saying this, saying that we need to protect the children, and like he also aimed it at China and Russia, and saying that they get access to your data and they know people's financial setup and then where people are. And granted, I feel like that's a give and take situation. Like the internet is a very powerful tool for education and communication across the world. And so you're going to have that little give and take, but that doesn't mean you should be able to control the narrative online or control what information is put online or anything like that. And that's really kind of what the government is leaning into. I don't know if you know a little bit about it, Bryson, but
It's definitely I understand both sentiments because of course TikTok is Chinese owned and there's quite a bit of data that could be used against the American public. An interesting thing that I found out, so China actually has limits on a lot of their social media or different types of web apps for students that is not available for Americans and other people outside of China. And so they limit how much exposure their children get to different forms of social media. But then also, a lot of American data is going offshore to China. And so that can be an issue. But then again, from the American standpoint, we've seen companies like Facebook that owns also not only just Facebook, but I believe WhatsApp, and I know for sure Instagram. And so, of course, they're taking our data. They're not sending it overseas. It's still in the U.S., but that plays a role in a lot of different things. And so that can influence things such as elections. Say, for instance, all of this data is being taken from someone that's left leaning, and then they kind of give more right leaning type viewpoints on their feed or whatnot, or vice versa. Somebody that's more conservative gets more left leaning viewpoints, and so there is an argument there. But I think that censorship is never the issue. I think a big thing of why TikTok specifically is being canceled or bans within the US is because there is a large amount of data that can be shown just within real time. So, for example, you can post from anywhere in the world on TikTok essentially. And so, of course, situations like what's going on in Palestine currently, those can be shared in real time. And so just different situations. I think that to some extent it is that data issue, but then to some extent it is censorship because now we're able to see what's going on in real time in any area of the world. So whether it's a war, whether it's a famine, whether it's hardship, I think one of the big things that really sparked the George Floyd protests actually was social media. And so, of course, seeing that in real time, of course, we've as Black people know Black men have been getting killed just erroneously for decades, millennias. And so now to broadcast 13 minutes of a man being essentially choked to death by a cop sitting on his neck, that's now been streamed to every demographic, not only in the United States, not only to the Black demographic, but to everyone that has social media in one way or another. We all saw that video if you have social media, or we saw things that have come from that video. And so I think that that's more so the issue is control, because we've seen how the Black Lives Matter protests spread around the world, countries that don't necessarily have Black people. Japan, for instance, large scale protests in a lot of areas in Europe. Yeah, I read about a story in Denmark where a young mixed man was killed in Denmark around the time that George Floyd was also killed. And so that sparked protests in Denmark. And so it's something that can be used to stage an uprising for the masses. Going back to the topic you had last show, of course, the farmers' protests. We're as Americans able to see that in real time because I didn't know about that being covered on American media. But going on to TikTok, I could see, okay, the farmers are driving their tractors through the streets of Paris. They're protesting for these reasons. And so I think that that's a big reason for it, is really that censorship, because you are able to share things in real time. And so once it gets enough shares, you say 1,000 people watch, if 100 people watch that, 1,000 more people watch that, it's a snowball effect until the whole world has seen it. And so I think that that's the bigger thing that's really going on, as opposed to
No,
data being offshore. So
exactly, exactly. And so, like you said, that control thing, like this whole thing is about control because if you can control the narrative, you can control how people think and react to things. Like you were saying, George Floyd protests really began online, but that's because you had the community able to talk and interact with each other, be able to plan those protests, and then go out and do that and make that happen. Like you said, you didn't know about the farmers' protests until you got on TikTok and watched this show, of course. Shout out Black Politics Show. But when you got on TikTok, you could see the farmers out there in Paris going through the streets and how they were protesting and what they were protesting for. And so, like, that's really the government's whole issue, this whole pushback on this social media, independent media, little uprise we have going on, essentially. And so, like, people ask, well, government can't limit you or limit what you say online, and they can't just take down whatever you say. And true, they can't, but they can lean on the social medias. They do it to Facebook all the time, getting data. Allegedly, got to work on our allegedlys as well, Bryce. Got to work on the allegedly.
most
But facts, facts. But allegedly, they get this data from Facebook all the time, and they even got Facebook to allegedly censor a lot of COVID-19 information and a lot of counter narrative information that they didn't want the public to see because, again, the vaccine didn't stop the transmission of COVID. So, I mean, it's just crazy. The internet's a very powerful tool, and we have to do everything we can basically to push back on this government tightening up of social media because once they control that and once you have no place to freely talk and converse, they basically got everything. They control your mind. You're not going to be able to learn the things you can learn. And so, yeah, not to drag this out, but and so his last policy spoken about was ending cancer, and so by that he President Biden means he wants to lessen the deaths due to cancer through his cancer moonshot program. And then he also launched an advanced research projects agency for health, which put out a treatment program that is said it will improve the outcomes of cancer patients. Um, This is basically a $2.5 billion investment to tackle cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and other diseases known to kind of plague America right now. And so, getting off of President Biden, former President Trump, this is his campaign platform. Again, this is from NBC, so not everything is said how probably he would want to say it, or probably even how he views it. But this is essentially kind of things he's thinking about. And so they said he had spoken about immigration and deportation by stating he would terminate open borders and stop immigration coming from the South. He also stated he would put travel bans on countries with a majority of Muslims. And then some countries he looks to expand his 2016 travel bans on, which would be Palestinian refugees, Syrian people, and people from Somalia. And so I think immigration right now is a huge topic as we're seeing a lot of uh I'll call them war stories. You have a lot of immigrants coming up and breaking the law or killing people. I think I saw a story about a young lady being killed in Georgia by an immigrant. I think I just heard another recent one. Again, this happening in New York. And then I think a lot of squatters issues is coming out of this too. And so I feel like him speaking openly and saying that he wants to stop the immigration wave right now is a bigger push. I think domestically, people are starting to see the hard thing about immigration because not everybody's bad, but not everybody's good either. And so you have to kind of limit what you do and how you allow people in the country. I feel like, I mean, really, that's even hard to say because it should be open borders, and that's like the most ideal setup. But then again, you see the people coming and killing and stealing and taking people's houses out. I don't know. Well, what do you think, Bryce?
So it's a mixed issue for me. So I don't believe that any human is illegal per se, because especially as Americans and Black Americans, we were supposed to be over here
Facts.
anyway.
Facts.
And so I know for me, and just looking at how my father would do things, God forbid anything happens in America, my dad would have made sure that we got to Canada or Europe or wherever we would be able to grow up safely. And so I can't say that people that are fleeing from issues in their own countries, they shouldn't have a right in the US, but I think it's a very multifaceted issue. And so I think that Republicans are using this as a political ping pong pretty much. Because as you mentioned, like the the one girl in Georgia that was killed, which that shouldn't happen to anybody. But then when we look at Americans, we have numerous murders per day. And so the majority of illegal immigrants, funny enough, pay taxes. The majority of illegal immigrants are just here to work and be in a safer place. And so I think where my issue lies is more from the economic standpoint, where, say, for instance, New York, they have kicked students out of local schools to build shelters for the immigrants. And they've also provided many of the immigrants with visa cards, which I get because, of course, New York is the most expensive city in the nation. And not having any money that can cause people to resort to crime. But given that there's so many people in poverty within the city of New York alone, I don't think that it's fair to American citizens that are not getting those same handouts and those same benefits within their city. But I also think
Exactly.
that it lies on Texas as well. Texas is essentially aiding and abetting illegal immigrants. And so they're coming in through the borders in the southern United States. So Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, but Texas is shipping these immigrants to places like New York City, Martha's Vineyard. And so, because New York City has a right to housing that was enacted long ago, essentially saying that everybody in the city does have the right to housing, they can't send them back essentially to Texas. And so, Of course, that's putting a strain on the city's resources, and New York is already strained for resources. There's not enough space for the people that have already lived there, been there their entire lives. But I think that we need to really focus on Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, and understand why is it that he is essentially aiding these illegal immigrants to New York. And so I think that that's
I'm
first and foremost.
pretty sure I heard. My bad. I'm pretty sure I just heard that like the whole reason that they're shipping them up to other cities is just so those cities get a taste of how it feels to have a lot of those immigrants coming to their state borders. I'm pretty sure I read something about that. I agree, it's a resource problem. Like that's really what it's getting down to. Like, and there's going to be a division problem because they're getting a lot of free resources given to them, and I feel like citizens aren't liking that. You feel me? Like they're giving you a phone at the border. They're giving you money. You feel me to get by, and as they should, you should be able to eat. You should be able to be safe. But then when you kick people out their homes, and then when you give them housing, and then you try to move them again from a different hotel, and then they start demanding for permanent housing here, and when there's already a crazy amount of homeless people, people that can barely afford where they're living, it's just a battle back and forth. And like you said, most of those immigrants, they're paying taxes. They're doing most of them are doing it right. That's not the issue. But it's going to be a space issue. It's going to be a resource issue, and really, like those states that could really probably take care of them are those like mid, Midwest, Mid East states where it's a lot of land but low population. I mean, I feel like that's the best place to put them for now until we can figure out something. That's just one of my ideas.
I definitely, yeah, I think that you brought up some good points, but I think this goes back to addressing the different political candidates. So we've heard Trump from the day that he wanted to run for president. He's going to be tough on the border. He's going to have Mexico build this wall. There's going to be no immigrants coming into this country. And we saw throughout the 4 years that he was president that we didn't get anything for the border. And so of course all presidents have broken promises, but that just seemed delusional to expect another country to build a wall to protect us. And so I think that I find it hard to believe that he's going to be tough on immigration. The only thing that I can really see happening is more kids in cages, which he did in his last presidency, and that's something that I don't think is the answer either. And so I think that it's really a no-win situation. And that's the big thing there.
Okay, okay. And Obama built them cages, and then Trump and Biden used them, and Biden's still building the wall for real. And that's really the like two wings of the same bird. You feel me? Like regardless, their central mission is getting done. But his next policy issue deals with international affairs. He says he wants to put in place 10% tax on all goods being imported to the US. And then he hopes to put tariffs on goods from companies that outsource their labors to other countries instead of using domestic labor force. And so a tariff, just for everybody, is basically a tax that is paid on specific imports and or exports, like tea or certain foods coming into the country, or certain foods or our products leaving this country. And so, by doing this, Trump hopes to put America first by prioritizing domestic production. I agree that there needs to be more domestic production. When you start putting taxes on things like that, that can kind of set us back. And countries wanting to work with us, as we saw with oh man, the tax war we got into, the import war we got into with China in 2018, going into 2019. Oh man, been a little minute. But yeah, and then so his next policy and the last one that we're going to look at is basically the ability of the president to deploy military into cities to crack down on crime, which I think is absurd, which is crazy to me. But he basically wants to be able to put them there without having to get permission from city leaders or governors and things like that. And
Yeah,
I don't, nah, go ahead, go ahead.
that I can't get down with. The last two topics actually. So, of course, you're a political science major. I majored in economics. The whole tariff situation is not going to end up well for the United States, as we've seen with
Not
the
at all.
China
Not at all.
situation. So given the economy is so globalized nowadays, it it's impossible to really sanction or impose tariffs on countries, especially a country like China, where we have quite a bit of our technology made there. Just looking around me, everything Apple that I have made in Shenzhen, China. And then of course, a lot of the chips, the Intel chips, the AMD chips that we use in our computers, our phones, Apple Watches, etc., that they're made in Taiwan. So everybody's wondering why things were so expensive after the pandemic. Taiwan was shut down for the pandemic. They weren't making the chips. There was a chip shortage. So imagine the price increase of things if, for example, we decided to put a tariff on Taiwan, China, Vietnam, it would cause the average consumer to be paying for that. And so, of course, I'm pro-American. I am very big on building in the United States, but not at the expense or not at the cost of consumer goods. And so that's something that we have to weigh out. It's a pretty big macroeconomic issue. And of course, macroeconomics is a very deep topic. I could talk all day about it. But in short, if you're putting tariffs on these things that are coming from other countries, expect to pay more for them as a consumer. Say, for instance, we put a 15% tariff on these chips. So your MacBook just went from $1,000 to 1150 with that additional 15% hike because of course Apple is not going to take $150 less in profit. They're going to pass that on to you as a consumer. And so that's
That's
where
why
the
they're
issue is
outsourcing.
at.
Okay.
And so I guess going into the second point you made, I think that that sounds like martial law. It sounds like a dictatorship, and that's my biggest gripe with Trump because of course, love him or hate him, there's been some things that Trump has done that really have impacted the middle and lower class and positively impacted. But the issue is he, to me at least, likes to really skirt the line between legal and illegal. And that's the issue that I have. And so, of course, you let's say, for instance, going back to the George Floyd protests, a lot of the protests that were happening were nonviolent. The vast majority of them, studies show, were nonviolent. But of course, someone like Trump, if they don't, if he didn't want that to happen, he would have been able to send in the National Guard or the troops and essentially shut these protests down, which would turn a nonviolent protest into essentially a massacre. And this happened at Kent State University in Ohio during the Vietnam War, where the military essentially turned on these students and massacred a bunch of students that were protesting against the Vietnam War. And so that really goes back to censorship, which we were talking about earlier, and that really is a fair line, and I completely disagree with that platform or that portion of
Absolutely.
the platform.
Absolutely. I think that's way too much power for one man to have, especially when we know where those people will be placed, especially he said he is suggesting the death penalty for drug dealers and people who rob places and everything else, which is yeah, clean up the crime, but you got to know where to stop yourself. And that's just way too much power for anybody, for any one person to have. But moving on, so we can hurry up real quick. The last candidate is Robert F. Kennedy. He is a third party independent candidate. One of his goals is to heal uh, kind of the racial back and forth we have going on in this country. It says he recognizes the gap between blacks and whites and when it comes to income, wealth, education, infant mortality, home ownership, incarceration, health, and other areas. It says one way he looks to he looks to repair the infrastructure of the Black community is with federal dollars. Basically, he looks to help rebuild banks, schools, hospitals, farms, and give money to local Black businesses so we can really start to build our economic wealth, which is really the start to really start healing this the Black community. I feel like once we kind of see that we can get these resources and these type of materials, then we can have to implement them the right way. So oh yeah, and then he said he looks to change the focus of the prison system to more of a rehabilitation thing instead of a punishment type of system. And then he also said economically he wants to help the Black community, working class with tax credits, federally backed 3% mortgages, child care subsidies, and home buying. And that's not just limited to Black people. That's really, he says, is really for the working class altogether. He says another policy point of his is restoring the faith in government. He wants to implement more transparency between the government and its citizens, and he looks to protect whistleblowers, basically people who are snitching on the big companies with money. And he looks to hold public officials accountable through legal prosecution when they abuse their power and the public's trust. And then his last policy point was peace, and basically, that's him getting out of these forever wars that we have going on. He wants to bring home troops, as well as in proxy wars, bombings, covert operations, coups, and other military and paramilitary services, not services, operations right now. Uh, proxy war proxy wars are basically wars the US fights through other countries. So think Vietnam, think Korea, and more recently you could think Ukraine, how we're kind of using Ukraine allegedly, yeah, allegedly, to basically fight Russia. And kind of is that war is more about position. We want to be right next to Russia. We want Russia to basically feel our presence. I'm not a big fan of the Ukraine war, actually. And then let's see. That was his last one, actually. That was the last one. Which I think RFK is a wonderful candidate. I'm really considering voting for him. I like his platform. I like what he says. We'll see how he fares against the other two in debates later on in the year.
All right. So to touch on some of RFK's policies, I think that he has a pretty solid policy kind of backing. Only issue is we've never really had, or not within recent history at least, had a third party candidate win. And I think that that's an issue for a lot of Americans where we see both sides and we agree with things on both sides, but we don't have any options, so we pick the side that we most align with. And so that's the big issue with third party candidates. I think the third party candidates held the strongest chance during the 2016 election, of course, where we had Elizabeth Warren for the Green Party, of course, Bernie Sanders, or not Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton for the Democrats, Donald Trump for the Republicans, and lastly, the we had what's his name, Gary Johnson for the Libertarians. And so I think that that was a big thing. Uh, but
I will say I was watching something and I did see a poll that said like 45% of Americans would consider voting a third party. Actually, I think RFK had sent like an email out, something like that. A poll he was watching. Like you were saying, it's hard for a third party to win, but this year, I think a lot of people are considering it, and he's getting on the ballot in a lot of the states. If he can get on TV and actually argue with these guys on national television, I think based off his platform, he has a strong chance, man. Like he's talking and it makes sense. Like Biden talks and he never means what he says, allegedly. Like he'll say one thing like I'm not building a wall and then builds the wall anyway. Like he says we're not going to attack Russia because that would be starting World War III. We go through Ukraine, attack them. There's a possibility of Ukraine and Russia having a peace treaty on the table, and the U.S. and the UK block it to keep the war going. This war could have been over. So it's just like agreed it's hard for people to get out of that two-party system and ideals. But when you have a guy that's making sense, and if he can actually get on that national platform, man, I'm telling you, he has a shot.
Yeah, I definitely think his platform is interesting, especially the whistleblower protection that he's looking at enacting. I think that goes into our last topic here, which is Boeing's recent issues. And so, of course, Boeing is the largest airplane manufacturer in the world, second only to Airbus, and so they're used by pretty much every major airliner out there. And so, of course, it's a big story here because Boeing has had quite a few issues with their airlines or with their planes kind of not having the quality control. And so recently they've been summoned to Congress to kind of discuss that. And the main whistleblower that was on Boeing's QA team or quality assurance team was recently found dead by suicide, allegedly. And so it presents a lot of issues because not too recent or not too far ago, there was a story floating around essentially saying the issue with essentially capitalism's impact on the different aspects of Boeing making money. And so we've gotten to a point where capitalism is now kind of being impacted by profits, which of course has always been a thing, but where do we stop when human lives are at stake? And so, of course, Boeing being the largest manufacturer of planes domestically and then also worldwide, it poses a serious issue. And so they've had issues on their 787s, their 737s, which are two of their kind of top selling models. And so to now at this point, many US airliners, notably United, have kind of stopped orders on their planes because they are having so many issues. Just within 2024, there's been at least 10 different issues allegedly based on malfunctions going on with Boeing planes that weren't due to human error. And so when you look at that, it really makes you question a lot of things, especially given the impact of human lives on capitalism. And so, is it worth saving a couple thousand or 100,000 and potentially risking X amount of lives? And so that's something that's really interesting to me. And I think that we've kind of reached this late stage capitalism where anything pretty much goes in the sort or in the pursuit of profit. And that's a really dangerous place to be in. And that can cause a lot of issues. So I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, just a little bit more on the whistleblower. His name was John Barnett. He was 62 years old. He died March 12th, like you said, due to an alleged self-inflicted wound in South Carolina. Uh, he has been in a legal battle with Boeing, stating that he suffered retaliation and hostile work environment for exposing the safety problems with some of their planes. Barnett had worked at Boeing for over 30 years. He retired in 2017, and I think he started his legal battles with Boeing in 2019. Um, the company really has an issue of safety hazards, and he was saying that they essentially tell their workers not to worry about it. And like you said, they're just pushing the plane out for the profit. They're just trying to meet the deadline. They don't really care about the safety of the occupants of the plane. Um, Recently, and I don't know the exact date, one of their Boeing jets had like stopped working in the air, and it took like a very big drop, and then it came back online, and I don't think too many people, I don't think anybody died, and not too many people were hurt. But that's an issue. Like we're in the air, thousands of feet in the air. I bought this ticket. I'm thinking I'm safe. I'm thinking the manufacturers of this plane took the time and the care to put it together because why wouldn't you? You're transporting thousands of people, millions of people per day on these same, you feel me, jets. And like you said, capitalism is just getting to the point of being untouchable in the sense that you could just say fuck human lives. And as long as I get my paper, I'm straight. You feel me? Like, I don't give a fuck who die. As long as my pocket's good, I'm cool. And like companies are just showing themselves time and time again, especially these big manufacturers, that they don't care about the people. And we're the one funding, like we're funding them. We're the reason you're around. And in 2021, a Boeing 777 engine fan blade had broke off during takeoff. Nobody was injured, but Boeing had literally just settled that case for 2.5 billion with the U.S. Justice Department over the investigation of the plane. Like they know they're doing this, and they still continue to put out these faulty planes. It's unbelievable to me.
And yeah, so I think that of course many people are going to say, well, I don't fly, this doesn't impact me. But it impacts everyone to some extent. And so, just two examples of kind of flight related issues that impacted people that weren't even on the flight. Firstly, right after 9/11, there was a plane that took off from JFK that actually malfunctioned on takeoff while flying over a neighborhood in New York, Far Rockaway, New York. And of course, New York is very densely populated, and luckily, it was during a time where many people were at work, and so they weren't in their neighborhood. But essentially, the plane fell out over the neighborhood and crashed into a residential area, killing quite a few people. And another example of this is the Concorde, which was the fastest commercial plane ever produced. And so this was a plane that was revolutionary for the time. It could get you from New York to London in just about 3 to 4 hours. And so, of course, that was a big feat of engineering. And upon takeoff in Paris, going back to the US, it ran over a piece of equipment from another plane that hadn't been properly maintained and crashed into a residential area of Paris, killing quite a few people. And so that really ended Concorde's lifespan as a company. And so, of course, this extends not only to planes, but just kind of looking externally to China. When we get to a point where capitalism really uh, it's cheaper to just pay the fine or pay the settlement for the human deaths caused versus just making your product better. It's really an issue. And in looking at China, we can see in the early 2000s there was a Chinese milk scandal, and so essentially 300,000 Chinese kids, babies actually, were poisoned by tainted milk formula. And so essentially the manufacturer cut the milk formula with poisonous chemicals in order to boost their profits. And so of course it boosted their profits, but at the expense of human lives. And in some of these kids now, a lot of them died, but then many of them that survived have lifelong issues, nervous system issues. And so it expands outside of that just airplane or air traffic bubble where, okay, yeah, it's I don't fly or I don't travel much. That's not a big deal to me. It then becomes an issue of outside of that, if we have manufacturers, say for instance, a pharmaceutical company that realizes it's cheaper just to pay the settlement than it is to make a decent product, that's where we get into issues. And we can see that with the opioid crisis and how for years the Sackler family allegedly was told this is highly addictive, this is going to cause issues, and they were pushed by consulting firms to continue to sell this product. And that's what sparked the opioid crisis because when people can no longer find these drugs, of course they turned to other forms of drugs. So that presents a pretty big issue there. But I will go ahead and wrap up for this episode. I think we mentioned everything. If you want to jump in, you can.
Nah, it's a great episode. Next episode, we'll take a deeper dive into online censorship and give you all a little bit more information on that. But other than that, nah, you go ahead, rap, bro.
All right. So thank you again for listening to the Black Politics Show. We'll see you for the next episode and peace.